Hi, and welcome everyone. And if you can hear the donging in the background, that means it's noon. It comes over our tornado sirens in my small town here. So, hi, and welcome to the Garden Hour with MU Extension. My name's Debi Kelly, and I am in Jefferson County, just south of St. Louis. So, we're so delighted that you guys are joining us. Today starts our weekly garden hours all the way through the growing season. So, we're here to answer vegetables and fruits and trees, landscape, lawn, bugs, all those kind of fun things, diseases that you might have as we go through the growing season. So no question is going to be a silly question or a stupid question. There are no stupid questions out there. So by all means, feel free to let us know if you've got questions. We're always happy to answer them. If you do have a question and we would like for you to put it in the chat box, Donna has changed her name to Ask Questions Here. So click on that in the chat box, Ask Questions Here, and type in your questions. And Donna will make sure that that question is answered if it's part of the presentation you have a question on, or if it's a totally different off the topic question, which we appreciate those as well, then go ahead and put your email address in there in case we're not able to answer that question. And only Donna is going to have that email address. And then if we don't get to it, either she will answer it or she will share it out to one of the others of us that are part of the team. And then we'll get back in touch with you via email to answer that question. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you and welcome. There's lots of us that are enjoying doing this for you every single week. With that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and start us out with the actual weather report with Dr. Tony Lupo. And I don't know about you, I am just so excited it's springtime that I can start to get outside and getting my hands dirty. But I sure wish some of this wind and rain wouldn't be as prevalent. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'll let Tony go ahead and take over.
Okay, thank you, Debbie, for introducing me. And if everybody can see the Garden Hour forecast introduction page, next week I'm going to come back with a snazzier one. So that's kind of a little too bare bones. But we'll talk about the weather, of course, and the weather, of course, has been back and forth over the last few weeks. It's either been quite cool or it's been unusually warm. I think the last time I talked to you all was the middle of March. And right after that, we had some of the coldest weather in March that we've experienced in some 20 to 30 years. So, and now, right now, to start April, things have been quite warm. I'm showing you yesterday's maximum temperatures around the state were around the 70s and into the 80s in many places. At my house, I measured 88 Fahrenheit. And of course, the temperature change from Monday to Tuesday was in the direction of much warmer temperatures, and we can see that that was the case. And of course, the big news today is that if you haven't heard, the town of Glen Allen near Bollinger had a tornado last night in which 4 people were killed, and this is a city just down south of St. Louis. And the cold front that passed through last night through mid-Missouri is still within the state. It's going very slowly right now. And there are many places in the the far southeast part of the state, if you're living there, you're still under a tornado watch until later this afternoon. So this weather system is being very slow to leave the state. And again, these weather systems have been very strong. There's been this propensity for very strong, warm, moist air coming out of the Gulf and cool, dry air coming down out of Canada. And that's creating these very windy days, whether it's warm winds bringing that air up when we're in front of ahead of the front, or when we get behind the front and it gets colder. And we've had two very, very noisy days with severe weather. Last week, Friday, you can see the number of severe weather reports on the left. 161 tornado reports, but not one in Missouri, thank goodness. A lot of big hail around the state. In Randolph County, just to our north, 2.5-inch hail, and to our south, 2-inch hail. Yesterday, we didn't see quite as many severe weather reports, although if you look at today's map, when things are done, it's going to be loaded with dots in the Ohio Valley. But here's the tornado that hit last night. It killed 4 people in the middle of the night. And again, that's what makes these things so dangerous. We saw up to softball size hail. I was sent a picture this morning of a person who had a softball size hailstone in Fayette, Missouri. So if anybody can enter into the comment section how big a hail they had, let me know. In the last 30 days, getting more into the gardening weather, in the last 30 days, precipitation has been fairly normal across much of Missouri, but from about I-44 south has been just very wet. Many of you down in the southern part of Missouri right now are actually seeing flooding after we were seeing drought last summer. So here in Missouri, things can change on a dime. Things are still very dry out in Kansas and Oklahoma. And it's the contrast between these very dry surfaces to our west and the very, very moist surfaces over Missouri that's allowing for this severe weather. But I bring this map up to show you how wet it's been in southern Missouri, but also how good the experts were in predicting that precipitation would be above normal in the Ohio Valley, including southern Missouri. And so the forecast for that above normal precipitation has been very accurate. How have drought conditions changed? Well, nothing to worry about in Missouri, but like I said, it's this drought that's to the west of us that's helped setting up a contrast so that severe weather has been a little extra powerful in our part of the country lately. And we had, if you pay attention to the College of Ag's website, they had a story on that we had produced. How did we do for March? March, we ran below normal, especially the last part of the month. And precipitation was close to normal again across most of Missouri. So except the southern part of Missouri where you were extremely wet. And these patterns held region-wide. If you look at the surrounding states, you would see this kind of a pattern where it was it went from dry north and west to wet south and east. And the temperatures went from very cold north and west to a little bit warmer south and east. So here in Boone County, we are only about 1 degree below normal, but it's still a little cool. Last time I showed you the change in the pattern between February and March. It was a huge change. What's changed in the last 2 weeks? Not much. The pattern that it established in early March pretty much stayed for the later part of March as well. Maybe we saw a little less waviness in the jet stream, but continued pattern from early March. The pattern that established in early March has continued for late March, and I expect that to continue into April. and into May. And we have to watch because we're leaving 3 years of La Nina conditions and we may be evolving into El Nino. And I'll have, since this is a weekly series, I'll make next week about where we're heading with El Nino. What does the precip look like? Day 1 to 7. Again, a little drier for the state of Missouri for the next 7 days, except the southeast part of the state where we'll expect more precipitation. 6 to 10 day outlook for the next 2 weeks, above normal temperatures. And once that front clears, below normal precipitation for us. So we're going to get into a period of a little drying, and that may be helpful. If it's above normal and drying, that may be helpful into you getting your garden ready. 3 to 4 weeks on down the line, it says equal chances here. That doesn't mean normal. It just means the experts don't have any idea what's going to happen 3 to 4 weeks from now. But I think with this pattern continuing, we may see things cool down a bit toward the end of April and maybe stay moist. Again, a reminder that I put out a forecast for 5 days at a time on my Facebook page, and that's there. I forgot to change the headline on this one, but you're good. The next couple of days, the rain and severe weather will be leaving the state this morning. We should see clearing and temperatures will be a little cool for the time of year, 50s in the today and maybe 50s tomorrow. But then the low temperatures will be in the 30s tonight and in the upper 20s north of Route 36. So if you're north of there, be ready for a little bit of frost. Be ready for a cool night. We may even see some of that frost down in the mid-Mo tonight, even though it'll stay above 32. Friday, Saturday, sunny, 60s and then 60s and 70s. Lows in the 30s to 40s and then the 40s to 50s. And then Easter Sunday through Tuesday, 70s to near 80 and lows in the 50s. So that's where we're at with weather. Hopefully that wasn't too long.
Thank you very much, Tony. We greatly appreciate it. It's always good to hear about the weather, where we're going, where we've been. So appreciate that very much. What I'd like to do is go ahead and turn this over to Kelly. She's going to be our moderator for today for all the questions that we received ahead of time to try to answer. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. So let's go ahead and get into our questions for today. So let me just pull it up. Debbie, can you see this okay?
Yes, but you're not in presentation mode.
Okay, what about now?
Yes, thank you.
Better. Okay, so we had a question come in from somebody wanting to know all about dahlias. And ever how you say dahlia. So I'm from Arkansas and I say everything wrong, but I say dahlia. Boy, what a beautiful, incredible flower. So let's talk a little bit about this. And this might be something that you might want to experiment with growing this year, because we can certainly grow them here in Missouri. Okay, so the first thing I want to farm that I follow on social media, it's called Floret Flower Farm. And the lady that runs this flower farm, she grows a lot of different colors and types of dahlias and has these very photogenic, photos that she'll put up on her social media. And it's just absolutely incredible. So, if you want to learn more about dahlias in particular, I encourage you to follow them and some of these other farms because dahlias make great cut flowers, so they are certainly something that we're seeing more and more of on flower farms for that very reason. So a little bit about dahlias. They are a late summer, early fall bloomer. So around September is when we see peak blooms in our dahlias. And that's awesome, because usually this time of the year, our flowers are starting to fizzle out from all of the summer heat and drought. And so, these beautiful flowers come at a very welcome time. Dahlias are the national flower of Mexico. There are over 50,000 cultivars of dahlias, whether they be, different flower colors or petal shapes, or the list goes on and on. There's lots of them. They need 6 to 8 hours of direct sun per day. Many are very tall and lanky, so they will need to be staked. And I've got a photo to show you of some ideas on that. Most are grown and propagated from these tuberous roots like you see here in the photo. So you will have the main root system of the plant, and then it will produce these enlarged tubers like you see here in the photo, and those can be removed to start new plants. There are some dwarf type of dahlias that are grown from seed. So if you've ever seen seed packets before, that is these dwarf types. And those are also very beautiful, but they're often treated as annuals because it's easier to just start new plants than having to try to store the dwarf types over winter. Okay. And so here's some ideas for staking. The photo here on the left is this netting that we see a lot in commercial flower production. And basically what you want to do is you want to lay this netting down when the plants are still very small. And then as they grow, you can kind of feed them up and through the netting, and you can add extra layers the taller that they get. And then the photo here on the right is just showing how some individual plants are staked using individual wooden stakes, and that also works well. So basically whatever you have, but they will need to be staked and kept up off the ground. So a little bit about soil and fertilization needs of dahlias. They do need fertile, well-drained soil that is high in organic matter. They need a pH of anywhere from 6.5 to 7. Now, when it comes to fertilizing, you do want to use a fertilizer that's higher in phosphorus and potassium than nitrogen. A 5-10-10 is a good analysis for dahlias. And you want to do that at the time of planting. And we're going to talk about planting in just a moment, but do this at the time of planting at a rate of about half of a cup in a 2-foot wide circle around the plant. Okay, so just go out about 2 foot and make a circle with that half a cup of fertilizer. And then in July, you want to do the same thing. You want to top dress with about another half of a cup, and then you want to just lightly kind of incorporate that into the soil. Pinching, dahlias do benefit from pinching and disbudding. And I'm not going to go into depth about this just for time's sake, but there is a lot of information online about when to pinch, when to disbud. And the idea is that if you do this at certain times, it makes the plant bushier rather than taller. So this is an option if you want to experiment with it and get those shorter, bushier plants. Dahlias do grow very quickly, and they will need a lot of supplemental water throughout the growing season. So make sure that you're monitoring these plants during periods of drought, especially in late summer when they're going to be getting ready to bloom. And you want to keep the soil moist but not wet. And so just so you won't have to babysit it and do as much hand watering, drip irrigation works really well for plants like this that need a lot of water. Now, dahlias cannot survive our winters here in Missouri, so they will need to be dug and stored indoors. And you want to dig these plants after the vegetative tops of the plants have died back. Once you dig them up, you want to just take a dry brush and brush off any excess soil and then let them dry, let them completely dry. This is the point where you can cut those excess tubers from the root system if you want to start new plants, or you can do this in the spring. Either one is fine. But before you pack them and store them for winter, you want to dust them with some type of fungicide to prevent rot during the storage process. And then you just want to pack those tubers and roots in moist peat moss, sawdust, or old newspapers. And then you want to store them in a wooden or cardboard box at about 40 to 45 degrees. And the reason that you want to do that is because plastic can retain moisture. And so the goal here is you want to use things that's going to help keep those plants dry. And so here's just what some of the tuber clusters look like after they're dug up and getting ready to store. And there's lots of information online about this as well if you want to read more about it. So you want to plant in spring, usually about 14 days before our first frost date. And that in Missouri is about April the 15th, at least here in southern Missouri. So, and this is typically the way you plant them. You can leave the tubers intact, or you can, take them off and plant individually if you want to start a bunch of new plants. But if we do get into some freezing weather during this time, you will need to cover them because, again, dahlias can't handle freezing temperatures. Botrytis and powdery mildew, which are fungal diseases, are the most common diseases that we see on dahlias. And just like any other types of plants, you want to make sure that you're doing good sanitation in your garden. So just cleaning up any diseased plant debris, disposing of it properly. Make sure that you're planting in the right site, that it is a site that has good soil drainage to prevent that wet soil condition that could lead to these fungal issues. You can use fungicide as a preventative. Keep the foliage as dry as possible. And again, drip irrigation works really well for this. And when you are in the spring and you're getting ready to plant, only plant healthy tubers. Tubers can carry disease and spread it to your planting area. So just dispose of any that don't look right. And there are very few insect pests of dahlias, and actually pollinators love dahlias, especially the one that are kind of the single petal varieties. They're not able to access the pollen of these really densely petal types, but the single types they will love. So just be mindful of that. And if you ever have an insect problem with your dahlias, feel free to reach out to one of us. If you really want to read some in-depth information about growing dahlias, the American Dahlia Society, and this is a link to their website, has some great information about everything to do with growing dahlias. So I encourage you to check that out if you want more information. So that is all I had about dahlias. And the next thing that we're going to talk about is square foot gardening. So Debbie, I will let you take it away from here.
Great. Yeah, if I can get there it is. Okay. So square foot gardening was a question that came in, and is this a good way to garden? And I'm going to say, yeah, it depends upon how you like to garden, but it is a really cool concept. So square foot gardening, you kind of see the bed there. You kind of see it already laid out. And I'll have a few more pictures here. So there are different ways that you can plant in your garden. Of course, you've got containers and those different sorts of things you can grow in. You also have your typical garden, which with different kinds of rows and crops that are going across or lengthways, however you decide to garden. And then there's a square foot garden. And essentially what they do is each one of these is going to be a square foot. So it's 1 foot by 1 foot. And then you plant as many different plants into this 1 square foot as what is needed or required according for the plant in order for it to grow. So some of the different advantages and disadvantages are listed here. You really kind of do them on a short bed basis, raised bed, a short one. Advantages is it's well organized, it's really easy, the crops are in its own space, it doesn't take up a lot of space. You can also do a lot of succession planning in this. Some of the disadvantages are that it does dry out faster than any kind of a garden that's going to be directly planted straight into the ground. That's the same with our raised beds. The square foot gardening does require just a little bit more attention so that you can make sure that things are growing as they need to be. So for example, in the picture on the right, you can see that there are different crops that are kind of all growing together here, and it looks really, really crowded. However, that's the amount of space that is required. And then you can put in the next crop, whatever you might like to do. It's neat and clean looking as well. So in order to set that up, you can go ahead and put out your bed and then mark your grids according to the square foot for however the length of your beds are. We generally say when you do a raised bed, only do it, I would stand on the side over here, stick my arm straight out and however far I could reach, and then stand on the other side, put my arm out, see how far I can reach. You don't want to make the middle where you can't actually reach into it comfortably. And remember, we want to save our back. So sometimes you don't need it as wide as what you think you may when it comes to some of the raised beds or even in the garden itself. So it's easy to get overcrowded. So make sure you research the information. I'll have links here for you. So how do you determine? So in each of these squares that are here, they're 1 by 1. If you have a plant that requires 1 square foot, a plant where you can put in 4 in that 1 square foot, 9 plants in 1 square foot, or 16 plants in 1 square foot. And you'll notice that there are 4 individual blocks here, and then there's 4 plants in each of those 4 blocks. And then of course you're going to thin when it's appropriate. So here's a diagram or pictures of what it is, how you can work with that square foot. If the requirement is 1 plant per square foot, you just put it in the middle. If you want 4 plants, you take that square foot, you divide it into 4s, and then you make a hole for those 4 plants. If it's 9 plants per square foot, you'd make 2 lines that way, 2 lines the other way, kind of your individual little spacing. And you'll notice that in this picture, this individual is using their first finger and then their little finger to kind of make those rows, because it's kind of about close to, and again, about the size that you would need within that square foot to put in 9 plants. And then on the 16 plant, again, you make a square or a cross within that 1 square foot. And then notice how he's using or she's using 2 fingers, where you're actually going to then have 4 holes for every one of these. So it's kind of a very interesting concept, and you're not going to overseed. I don't know about you, but when I have a row and then I'm planting and I put the seeds in, because I just kind of do it by my hand, there's lots of those seedlings that I'm going to have to thin out. So this helps to keep you from having too thick of a garden as well by designing it like this. This is just a sketch of what plants could be in 1 square. These plants can then go into that 4 per square foot, 9 per square foot, and then 16 per square foot. So it kind of gives you an idea of, and if you think about it, carrots can grow quicker or can grow closer together than, let's say, for example, a head of lettuce. And so that's how they kind of divide that space out. So a good resource for you, the University of Wisconsin has a really, really great hour-long video on square foot gardening, as well as an extension or publication that they've created and some additional resources that are at that link at the top. And I believe Tamra's probably already dropped that link into the chat box for you, so you can grab it. Kind of the person who came up with or had the great concept of at least creating and writing a book on it is Mel Bartholomew. It's kind of like the guru of square foot gardening. I have this book in my office. It's an excellent book for me to use as a guideline. He goes through and puts down every individual crop per page that you can think of, the main crops that you would put in your vegetable garden. And he kind of gives you a description. And then here's your 1 square foot. So for spinach, you're going to have 9 plants in 1 square foot. So this is just a jump start to decide if this is something you might like to do in your garden. That's all I've got for you.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. Okay, our next question for today was about another plant that I'm probably going to butcher the name of, and that is cotoneaster. And Katie, what do you have for us on that today? And did I pronounce it correctly?
So, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So, interesting. I have heard it that way, and also cotoneaster. So, I've heard both, and I have no idea which one is the correct one. So, cotoneaster, it can be either a ground cover shrub or a large shrub, depending on type. I did not actually realize until I was looking up how many different kinds of cotoneaster there are. The lower ground cover type seems to have a really interesting branch texture. It's very flat and horizontal with branches coming out, kind of, they call it like a fishbone texture, so very different. Typically dark green, smallish leaves, red berries, so makes for interesting garden texture. And one thing, it really does require excellent drainage. With the specific question asked about dying out plants and the main part dying out, it's hard to say since they were new plantings. It could be that depending on your area, we had some pretty severe drought in spots. And in other areas, you know, we could have water holding, so it could have been a drainage issue too. So hard to say without more information what exactly happened with these particular cotoneasters. But another thing to think about too is that those runners or those branches, if they touch the ground, they do root, which is probably why they're seeing green on those runners. So you could basically use those runners as new plants and take out the dead parts and the main dead parts. So interesting plant for the landscape. It's a neat one to add some different diversity. And that's all I have.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, our next question was about tomatoes. What is the one of the top recommendations for Missouri? What is the most productive disease-resistant types? And Dr. Trinklein is going to talk to us about this today. And Dr. Trinklein, before we get in the tomato question, how do you pronounce the last plant we talked about? Do you say cotoneaster?
I say cotoneaster, but that's
Okay.
only because my teacher told me cotoneaster.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Very good question on tomato, very timely. I don't know how many of the audience know that April is National Garden Month, and tomato happens to be America's #1 home garden vegetable. So more people plant tomatoes than any other vegetable in their garden. And while it's just a bit soon to plant them in Missouri, we're approaching that time very quickly. My assumption is that this question came from a homeowner. And for homeowners, we would recommend tomatoes that have what's called an indeterminate growth habit. That simply means that they continue to grow and grow and grow until in nature, frost knocks them out. A tomato will first of all put out 5 leaves, and then a flower cluster, 3 leaves, flower cluster, 3 leaves, flower cluster, ad infinitum. And there actually are tomatoes that are growing in greenhouses for years. They let them down and kind of coil the stem like a rope that if you stretch them out, it would be well over 20 feet long. I say this for homeowners because you want a constant supply of tomatoes. Folks who do this commercially often choose what's called a semi-determinate growth habit, where there is a concentration of fruit set. You get a lot of fruit in a hurry, but then production ends. So the result is they have to plant 2 or 3 different plantings to have fresh tomatoes throughout the course of the growing season. Tomatoes normally are classified either as slicing or salad tomatoes, salad being cherry, grape, or so forth. Slicing tomatoes usually are between 8 and 10 inches, inches, 8 or 10 ounces in size, and hopefully have a very good flavor. That's the main reason they're the #1 home garden vegetable, is that nothing tastes like home garden tomatoes, especially when you compare it to those bought in the store. From the standpoint of diseases, unfortunately, some of the more problematic diseases, science is yet to find genetic material that would cause resistance. But we do have resistance in some rather troublesome diseases that, as long as you plant genetically resistant varieties, this should be no problem at all. A tomato is known or advertised according to its disease-resistant package. And this consists of a series of letters following the varietal name. Example being Big Beef, and that's the one I'm going to recommend if you're looking for a productive, large-fruited, flavorful tomato that has a good disease-resistant package. The package is VFNT. V as in Victor, F as in Fred, N as in Nancy, T as in tomato. Those letters stand for verticillium, fusarium, nematode, and tobacco mosaic virus. And there actually are a few more diseases now genetics have incorporated resistance to that makes the list even longer. Big Beef is an example of an all-American selection. There is a non-for-profit organization headquartered in Illinois that accepts entries from seed companies around the United States. And in turn, they distribute these seeds to trial gardens, usually associated with either a botanical garden or a university around the United States. They're rated, and the data is fed into Illinois. And if it achieves enough points, it wins the coveted All-American selection. When in doubt, an All-American selection would be a good choice because it has proven itself to perform well all over the United States. Just last year, Big Beef was improved, and it's now called Big Beef Plus. And the plus, again, was additional genetic resistance to diseases, plus it's supposed to be more flavorful. If salads are in your on your diet, for a cherry tomato, a salad tomato, Sweet 100 is very aptly named. The fruit are rather small, but extremely flavorful and sweet, and it too was an all-American selection. So there are many, many more. There actually are 10,000 named varieties of tomato. For those who are heirloom tomato fanciers, I'm sorry, but there is no disease resistance in heirloom tomatoes. And that's one of the reasons that we recommend hybrid tomatoes, so that the disease resistance is built in. And that way, for those diseases, you don't have to worry about the use of pesticides or other things that might endanger the garden or the environment. Kelly, I think that's all I have.
All right, thank you. And while we have you on, well, we're going to give you the next question as well,
Okay.
which is about planting seeds. And the question is that they have read that you shouldn't try to plant seeds until the soil dries out. But why does that matter? So what do you think about
Well,
that?
that's a very good question. And I think we can look at it from two different points. From the seed standpoint and from the soil standpoint. Let's do the seed first. Even though it looks lifeless, a seed is alive and living. All living things respire. And for respiration, we need oxygen. If you sow a seed in a suboxidized, that is to say, wet soil, it will tend to starve it of oxygen and weaken it. Now, unfortunately, there are certain seedling diseases that love wet, suboxidized conditions. We call them the water moles, and perhaps the most problematic one in seedlings is called rhizoctonia. So allowing the soil to dry will allow the soil's atmosphere to contain more oxygen, which is needed to bring that seed out of dormancy and to cause it to sprout and grow into a mature plant. From the standpoint of the soil, one of the worst things that we as gardeners can do is to work soil when it's too wet. There's a term called soil structure. This is the way the particles of soil are arranged or held together. Soil structure would dictate the soil's ability to drain, but yet to hold water after drainage. There's no better way to destroy soil structure than to work it when it's too wet. Might ask, well, what do we use as a guide if it's too wet or workable? There's always the old baseball test. You take some soil, pack it into a ball about the size of a baseball, put it in one hand, and with the heel of the other hand, strike it sharply. If the heel of your other hand leaves an imprint in the baseball of soil, it's too wet. That soil ball should fly apart. Then we know it's, in most cases, dry enough to work. So both from the standpoint of the well-being of the seed as well as the well-being of the soil, we do not recommend planting seeds in soil that is wet. That's all I have, Kelly.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, our next subject is about bedding plants, and it is that time of the year where we're starting to see a lot of beautiful flowers and vegetables and just all kinds of plants showing up at the store. And Donna is going to talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay, let me see about sharing my screen. Okay, so yes, it is time to start thinking about those bedding plants. And there are going to be a lot out there, a lot of beautiful ones. And so start thinking about what you want to plant and where you're going to purchase it, and start shopping around and taking a look at what they have to offer. When you're choosing bedding plants, I'm just going to cover some of the things that you need to look for. One is good foliage color. You don't want plants that are faded out or browning or yellowing. You want a nice dark green. It can be a little bit lighter green, but for the most part, a good, healthy looking green for sure. And two examples are below on the pictures. On the left, we have verbena, and on the right, we have marigolds. And the foliage looks great. The blooms look great. These are examples of something I would buy. Okay, so key pointers, pick plants that are well filled out for the pot. And so if you're looking at 4-inch pots and you just have one little bitty stem in it, you might consider putting it back. Look for something that's more fuller, and if you're looking for 6-packs or 4-packs, make sure all those cells are filled. Make sure you're getting a good quantity for the amount that you're paying. Those plants should be full and healthy. Avoid signs of insect damage or even disease spots. Look for dead stems. If you see any of that, put them back. You want to pick something that is good and healthy. Choose varieties that are mostly problem-free. Several years ago, we had problems with impatiens, and it was one specific variety of impatiens. And so we were trying to steer people to a better variety. So if you know that you've had problems with something, or you know there's been problems with fellow gardeners that you might steer clear of those and try to find something that you're going to be successful with. Remember that you need to be putting these plants in the right plant for the right place. Just remember that every plant has its preferences. So plant sun plants in sun, shade plants in shade. If they like to be dry, make sure you put them in an area where it's not going to be as wet. Or if it's something that wants to be wet, put it in that area. And just remember, anything that you buy, whether it's on a clearance cart or whether it's been discounted, anything that is stressed, if you take that home and it's stressed, it will lead to more problems later, because we find that stressed plants will end up getting more insect problems, and they get more disease problems, and they don't thrive. If you're someone that has good luck with picking up plants that don't look so great, well, I mean, I can't say don't do it, but I can always say try to pick the better looking plants, the healthier looking plants. That way you start out on a good note. That way you keep moving in the right direction, and the more likely to have success with plants. Make sure that the plants are stocky, short, and bushy. I know tomatoes tend to get tall pretty quick, but the key with tomatoes is you can bury them deeper. Other plants, you can't do that. And so that's why I put two examples on here. Herbs, you plant them at the same depth that they are. Most bedding plants, plant them at the same depth that you would find them in the pot. But tomatoes, on the other hand, you can buy them a little bit longer and lankier because you can bury them deeper. So just pay attention. Get things that are short and stocky, bushy. Think about that root system. A lot of these plants at some of the box stores, as well as some of the nurseries, watering plants can make or break a garden center or even a nursery area. And so if they don't have a good water, plants start to suffer. And so they start getting root rot, and the roots are starting to turn brown to black. I always try to take a look at those roots before I buy them. If they're white or creamy white, they're healthy. If they're black or brown, or you just don't see many of them and they are not in good shape, you might consider putting it back. That root system can really tell you a lot about that health of that plant. And that can make all the difference of whether that plant does well for you or not. And blooms or no blooms. I prefer plants with no blooms, and only because there's not that added stress for those transplants. And what you may do is find one that is blooming nicely, and then when you get it home, you cut it back. You don't want to cut it back too hard to stress it out, but you want to get rid of the blooms that are there. That way you give the plant a chance to establish its root system. So when a plant is blooming, its focus is on those blooms. If you take away those blooms, then it's going to focus more on root establishment. If you can focus more on the root establishment, you have the healthier, better plant. And so I always try to say no blooms, or remove those blooms once you get them home. And I know that is a hard thing to do. I know I always ask myself, they're so beautiful. Do I really want to do this? But I say, yes, you do. And then, of course, don't forget to harden off your plants when you get them from a greenhouse or a nursery, because a lot of times they're in a greenhouse protected environment, or they're in a shade house, or, they're in somewhere where they are all cozy and nice. And when we take them home and we put them out in full sun, or we put them out with the weather extremes where the wind is a little more brutal, sometimes those plants don't do so well. So I try to always, if I'm buying plants from like a greenhouse or a nursery, I always try to make sure that they get about a week and a half worth of acclimatization. So that I'm going to take them from that greenhouse setting to outdoors. So where they're going to have the full sun, where they're going to have the drying and the of the winds. And so basically all you're doing is making it a little hardier. And so you can do this just by putting in a protected spot for a few days, and then gradually moving it out to where it's going to have the elements. And so anyhow, those are just some tips on picking some of the healthy bedding plants.
All right. Thank you, Donna. That's got me in the mood to go shopping. Okay, next we are going to talk a little bit about lawns. So I know lawns are starting to wake up here in southern Missouri, and we've got a lot of growth, and we've had a lot of questions about pollinator-friendly lawns and different things like that. So Tamara, what do you have for us today on lawns?
Thank you. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. So I love this picture. This was in my neighborhood. And to me, it tells me there are two kinds of people in the world, those who love their lawns and those who have lawns but might have other priorities. I just want you to know there are no judgments here. I just am going to give some information about both. So first of all, we're just going to spend a little bit of time on spring pre-emergent herbicides. This is not necessarily my area of expertise, so I'm going to give you guys a couple links in the chat with more information, including a video that we did last year where one of our other specialists actually went over this in more detail. So briefly, with spring emergents, what they are these herbicides are a form of weed control that prevent germinated weed seedlings from growing. So some people will call these crabgrass killers or preventers, but it really will stop many grassy and broadleaf weeds. Germination of seed really depends on the soil temperature. And once soil temperature at a depth of 1 inch reaches 60 degrees Fahrenheit for several days, then that's when these seeds are going to start germinating. So right now is a good time to be applying this, definitely before the end of April. And you can see on this slide some of the chemicals that we'd be looking for right here. I'm not going to tell you all how to say them because I don't know how to say them, but there are quite a few different chemicals that are pretty effective at controlling crabgrass. If you are looking for an organic option, corn gluten meal is a way to do that. All right. So last year, we also asked you guys, we polled you guys to find out what kind of lawns you like to have, and there was a lot of interest in pollinator-friendly lawns. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that right now. So you probably have heard about no-mow May. Well, I'm just letting you know here in Missouri, it's pretty much no-mow April. I know that doesn't sound quite as great as no-mow May, but April is when our lawns are actually starting to come alive, and you start seeing a lot of those dandelions and henbit and other things like that are helpful for our pollinators. So a weed is a flower out of place. So since these flowers are where I want them, I'm going to call them lawn flowers. And when we think about why do we even need these? Well, because right now is when the bees are starting to emerge and other pollinators are starting to emerge. And there's not a lot in bloom other than what we would consider these weeds or lawn flowers. So they really are producing food at a time that is essential, and there's not a lot out there. And there was a study done that showed that unmown urban lawns can actually increase the presence of bees by about 5 times. So these lawn flowers actually are really filling an essential role. If you are going to do no-mow April here in Missouri, there are some things that you need to take into consideration. You may actually have some laws on the book in the city or with your HOA that prevent you from just letting your lawn go crazy. So you'll want to find out what those are. A lot of them, it's you're not allowed to have things that are growing more than a foot. And keep in mind that these really are created to reduce noxious weeds. They help manage pest problems like mice or rats. They can prevent dangerous property conditions. It can minimize allergens. So there really are some good reasons to have these. And so we do need to respect it. Some other considerations, this will take effort. This is not just an excuse to just let everything go. I'm going to give some more information about each of these, but I do want to put these out there. Flowers beget more lawn flowers, or weeds beget more weeds. So your neighbors might look at this and be concerned. So we're going to talk about what you might do. Also, I do just want to point out, lawns are very different than native prairies. So while it can go a little bit, your lawn will start growing, that's the grasses that are in there are very different than what you would find in a native prairie. So if you just let it go, you're going to end up with something like this. And perhaps you'd like to have more of a natural look, but after no mow April, you might want to have something different than this. So let's talk a little bit more about what you're going to need to do. So with city regulations or HOA regulations, work with your local officials. You can let them know the benefits of having a pollinator-friendly lawn. You can work with them to maybe modify or temporarily suspend weed ordinance regulations that can help you avoid fines. It's also been found that if you can at least mow around the edges, people feel like at least something's being done, that maybe this is intentional. You also can add a sign, and Xerces Society actually has a sign. It's for No Mow May. So you might want to consider changing it a little bit or creating your own. Also, most mowers are not equipped to cut grass that's really tall once May arrives or June arrives. And so you are going to want to cut it down slowly to about that height of 3 to 4 inches. If you cut it all at once, it can actually stress out your grass and cause death because you're removing so much leaf material at the same time. So you'll want to do it slowly. Another thing you might consider is actually mowing maybe part of your lawn and leaving the rest of it in bloom. So maybe instead of going the entire month without mowing, maybe you're going to go 2 weeks for each part of your lawn. But do it so that you, when the month is over, you still have a lawn, but you're still providing the flowers for all of the pollinators. Also, remember that the lawn flowers beget more lawn flowers. When the dandelions are finished blooming, go ahead and you can cut those down or mow those down before they go into seed heads, so that you're not making your neighbors upset. And also, some people are concerned about is that you can end up with like woody trees in your lawn. Once you start mowing, those will be taken care of, so you don't have to worry about it. And again, the grass that we put in lawns are different than native prairies. So if you really like that look, consider native grasses. Some other things you might want to consider long-term beyond April and May. You might consider mowing less often. Lawns that are mowed less often, maybe 2 times a week, or even just extending a week and a half, also can provide the benefit of larger drought-resistant root systems. You also might consider planting crocus directly in the lawn. I have crocus growing in my lawn right now. It's beautiful, and pretty soon those blooms are going to be gone, and those leaves, you won't even see them mixed in the lawn. You also could consider overseeding with clover. There's lots of different kinds of clover that are better. White clover is okay. Red clover is better. Crimson clover is the best for pollinators. There are other lawn mixes that can be good, like red fescue, different kinds of fescue, self-heal, creeping thyme. Things like that can provide a little bit more information, or more pollinator-friendly greenery in your lawn. Another thing to consider is maybe you want to actually eliminate parts of your lawn. When you eliminate parts, then you have more areas for flower. And just as we close up, because we're wrapping up with time, I just want to let you guys know there is a Master Pollinator Steward course that is starting tomorrow, actually. A couple of the sections still are accepting registrations, but I'll put this information in the chat as well. That's all for today.
All right. Thank you, Tamra. Well, Debbie, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you to close us out.
Sure, that sounds great. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the PowerPoint back up again. We just want to say thank you very much for joining us. We are so happy that we're starting on a weekly basis again, because it just is exciting for us to be able to talk about our passion. there's a lot of links that go into the chat box. And so if you want to know how to save those links, when you're in the chat, down here where it says to, you'll notice, and it may not be in the exact same spot, on mine now, it's located down here, but right click on those three little dots, and then you can save that to wherever you might like in your computer file system. Then remember, we're weekly. I'm going to leave this up here for just a few minutes so that you can grab your local horticulture specialist in your area, or if you decide you want to reach out to any other one of us, you're more than welcome to do so. And we'll be happy to answer your questions as we go through the growing season. So we just thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.